So thank you for those of you who introduced yourself in the chat box. It's great to see so many participants from different parts of the world joining us. And welcome again to those of you who have just joined us. So my name is Alexandra Atalla. I'm the Program and Knowledge Management Analyst at UNDP. And today's event is the second session of a two-part coffee series. And it is organized through the Food and Agricultural Commodity Systems community, the FACS community, under FOLUR, the Food Systems Land Use and Restoration Impact Program. So the event that we organized last month, the first event, which was organized with Evidencia, we had several experts from the Global Coffee Platform, Conservation International, UNDP, and Rabobank Foundation, and they have discussed the importance of strengthening multi-stakeholder processes and spaces to foster collaborative action in the coffee sector. And today's session, which will be led by Conservation International, will focus on the demand side, so the review of different key trends and commitments in the coffee sector. Our lead facilitator today is Niels Hack. Niels is the director of the Sustainable Coffee Partnerships at Conservation International. And before giving him the floor to present further today's topic and also introduce our three experts, I wanted to mention that this event is recorded and we have Spanish interpretation available for anyone who is more comfortable listening to the content in Spanish. So welcome again. I hope you all enjoyed this session and over to you, Niels.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. And I think we can flip to the next slide. So as Alexandra mentioned, it last session in this two-part series focused more on kind of the organization of stakeholders in producing countries, so more on the supply side. I think this session we're going to dive in more, what do we see in trends on the industry side, so kind of the push and pull in sustainability. And in recent months we've seen three new reports that are all quite influential in tracking and monitoring changes in the coffee sector on where are we driving in terms of sustainability. So we'll hear from each of the authors of the reports on what are key findings in their report. But I think an important element in all of this is that we see this emerging trend across the industry to have a stronger focus on increased transparency, more public disclosure of information on who's doing what on sustainability efforts, and also monitoring progress over time, both on individual efforts, but also sector-wide. So without that, if we can go to the next slide, we'll have three speakers. So we'll have Sjoerd Panhuizen from Ethos Agriculture, who also goes by Mr. Coffee Barometer. So he's been the lead author of many coffee barometers over the past few decades, so very knowledgeable on this topic. I have Helga Buitrago from the Global Coffee Platform, the director for programs and corporate partnerships at the GCP, leading a lot of their work around their sustainable sourcing, the code and the equivalence mechanism. So you'll learn a lot about what that means in their annual report and tracking progress. And then last but not least, my colleague Valerie Baird, senior manager on our team and working closely with me on the Sustainable Coffee Challenge, leading all of the efforts around our Commitments Hub and our annual Commitments Hub report, where we track progress what we're seeing in terms of commitments and accountability around that. So without further ado, I'm excited to pass the floor to, oh, that's right. Thanks for flashing this up before. I'm so excited to dive in. We're going to start with a couple of Menti questions just to get the interaction going with the audience and kind of get a sense where everyone stands. So you can go to menti.com and use this code to access, or you simply scan the QR code. And we basically, from each of the three reports, pulled one kind of fact bit and turned that into a Menti question. And I think we're pulling up the first question right now. There you go. I hope everyone made it to the Menti. Coming up. So the first question, we have already 90 players. It's a little bit of a quiz question. So can we get the first question there? Oh. Oh, okay. This is the format. Sorry, I didn't realize that. So first question, and please drop in your answers quickly. According to the coffee barometer, what's Europe's percentage of the world coffee consumption? Let's see how many are getting this. We get a lot of, everyone voted. There you go. Let's see. 24%. I think it's 33, right? It would be helpful if I would know that the answers as a cheat sheet, but Sjoerd is going to help us out there.
It's 1/3.
1/3, right? Yes, there you go. I started to doubt myself. So question 2. There we go. It's coming up. According to the GCP report and the ICO, the share of the top 5 coffee producing countries in global output has increased since 1990 from 57% to over 65, 70%, 75%, or 80%. There you go. Alex, you had the correct answer here. It's 75%, right? 70% was. Sorry, I should have these answers ready on hand. And the last question, which is related to the Challenge Commitments Hub report. So, which SDG was selected most? So SDG 2, Zero Hunger, SDG 12, Responsible Consumption and Production, SDG 13, Climate Action, or SDG 15, Life on Land. There we go. This is everyone guessed it right. So SDG 12, Responsible Consumption and Production. So with that framing, I think it leaves a good teaser to dive into the reports more. So without further ado, over to you, Sjoerd, to walk us through the coffee barometer.
Sure, happy to do so. Thanks for the invitation. Let's go to the next slide. And the next, because I'll just give a little bit of background. We indeed are now up to the 7th edition of the barometer, and actually we started in 2006 with a very simple question. At that moment in time, a lot of coffee companies were making big claims about their sustainability efforts and promises, and we wanted to create like a sort of mirror to understand, okay, what's going on, what are these claims about, what is actually what's going on in the sector, who's doing what are these promises, which direction is the sustainability debate taking. And over the years, we realized we are discussing a lot of challenges, but we lack a lot of basic information and a lot of basic understanding of what's actually going on in the coffee sector at large. And that's why I think it's also the coffee sector is quite opaque, I would say. And that's also where our report comes in, where we try to actually put a sort of spotlight on the non-transparency in the sector, because we think sustainability without transparency is quite a difficult trajectory. Let's get to the next slide. And in this new barometer, we actually try to bring together a couple of big challenges the sector is seeing. And let's go to the next slide and put them all on one slide. In the report, of course, all of these elements get their own chapter, but just briefly for this presentation, what we do see on the one hand is concentration in the global green coffee trade. So on the one hand, the concentration in production, and we do indeed see that Brazil, Vietnam, Colombia, Honduras, and Indonesia are currently good for 85% of all the coffee in the world. Indeed, I'm not mentioning any country in Africa. And that is worrying, especially if we look at the climate scenarios, where we do already see that areas available or suitable for producing Arabica coffee, but also a lot of the areas on the Robusta are under heavy strain of the climate change and the influence of changing weather patterns. And at the same time, what we also realize in the coffee sector, and that's a discussion that has been coming up in recent years, is this whole concept of coffee income compared to living income. And if we, it's not really easy to see on this slide, but actually only in Brazil you can currently make a sort of living income by producing coffee, and in any of the other countries it's hardly possible by just producing coffee to make a living income. Of course, we also realize most of the farmers are very smart and will diversify their income streams, but the issue here is that with coffee alone, this crop gets the sort of image of a poverty crop, because it's fairly costly to grow. You need a lot of labor to pick it, and of course, in recent years, the price, yes, it has gone up, but the price to produce it has also gone up. So what farmers need is, especially as I just mentioned, in the light of climate change, is to move towards really agroforestry, coffee systems, regenerative agricultural systems, but that's also a costly step. And if we look in a lot of countries, the models of large sun-grown plantations are still like the models that are being promoted, while we do know that we need to move towards smarter ways of producing coffee to really manage microclimates and really make a shift in the way that we produce coffee. What is also lacking still is a lot of information. For example, for a lot of African countries, we still have not really access, or we do not have right information on, for example, what is actually the balance between sun and shade grown coffee, and where do we start if we want to move towards more shade grown coffees. Another element that we see in the market is the stagnation of the procurement of certified coffees, and of course you might know the Fair Trade and Rainforest Alliance certified coffees. There's a lot of coffee actually available on the world market. We think, according to our figures, more than 50% of the coffee somehow adheres to sustainability standards. But if we really look at the procurement part, then only 25% of this coffee is also procured under these standards, which means that farmers get some premium price or some training advice, and so there's a big discrepancy between what's available versus what's being bought by the companies. Let's go to the next slide. The role of leading roasters, that's something we highlight in our report. We've looked at the main, the top 10, the top 11 big roasters that are good for 1/3 of the coffee trade in the world. And we started relatively with a very simple question, like, okay, do any of these companies, do they have a very comprehensive sustainability policy, and do they report comprehensively on their sustainability policies and practices? Let's go to the next slide, which gives us a brief overview. These are the companies we assessed, including Nestle, Starbucks, GD Peets, which are the big three. Then Lavazza, Cibo, Melita, UCC, Massimo Zanetti, Strauss, Smucker, and Kraft Heinz. And just from looking at this picture, you can also get an idea of how mature their sustainability policies are. I think the message that we want to share here is that, a bit to our surprise, more than or around half of the companies still do not have a mature, understandable, measurable sustainability goals in their policies, and so we also cannot find anything about it in their reporting. If we go to the next slide, we see a bit more detail. So we can break it down and put our coffee in some coffee cups and look at the social strategy, the environmental strategy, and economical strategy. Of course, I would like to refer you for details to our report, but you might pick up from this overview that yes, companies do have quite some understandable, concrete ideas about social practices. We have seen an improvement on environmental policies, but we were a little bit, well, let's say mildly, we were quite shocked to see that none of this translates back in their economic strategy, and that means their procurement policies. For a lot of companies, we had a hard time even giving them points for actually, okay, so what does this mean for procuring your coffee? If you, on the one hand, talk about living income, do you also translate that back into policies? Do you translate those policies into practices? But we couldn't find any proof there. So there's a lot of room for improvement here. So let's move to the next slide. Of course, none of these companies will be able to address any of these big issues on their own. Of course, they all have a individual contribution to make, but in the end, it has to come from collective action of the coffee industry at large. And if we look at, let's go to the next slide. If we look at the current multi-stakeholder initiatives, the main ones. Then we mentioned the Global Coffee Platform, the Coffee Public-Private Task Force of the ICO, and the Sustainable Coffee Challenge. We do see that some companies are part of all of them. Other companies specifically choose to be part of one or two. And I think it's Kraft Heinz and Smuckers have chosen to not take part in any of the international discussions around sustainability. Of course, there's a lot to say about all of these multi-stakeholder initiatives and what's on their agenda, and also the impact that they potentially can make in fostering a more sustainable coffee sector. We do think it's very important that companies really take part in these initiatives and really are open to discuss all the sustainability challenges. Where it becomes more difficult is, of course, okay, how do we translate all these nice ideas and activities into practical action and into plans? Because we also asked all the companies, okay, how much do you actually invest in making the sector more sustainable? And unfortunately, none of the companies gave us an answer to this very important question. So it's still very difficult to really figure out, okay, are companies really serious? Are they serious about their involvement in these initiatives, and do they put their money where their mouth is now? Just let's go to the next slide. Because we expected actually a bit more of these companies, and especially in light of all the mandatory due diligence regulation that is coming up. And of course, we've been very much involved in discussions around the deforestation regulations, but there are other ones. And I think the whole corporate sustainability reporting directive could have been a very good starting point for a lot of companies to already voluntarily start sharing the necessary information and be transparent on their do's and don'ts. But as I just showed, for a lot of companies, that's still not the case. So it's coming from a more legislative side, and that is gonna be quite challenging for a lot of companies. We do see they are not ready, and they are also currently taking what I would say, instead of a proactive approach, a more reserved approach, where they are not taking the necessary responsibility and action, and actually start challenging the due diligence legislations in itself, which I think is a bit of a they put themselves on a back foot compared to a lot of other sectors. So all in all, I maybe to conclude, I think what we've seen in the coffee sector is that we maybe just go to the last slide. What we see in the coffee sector is a lot of focus on actually sustainability at field level, at farm level, and a push towards what the farmer has to do to be more sustainable, while we think it's really time to look in the mirror for these companies and really step up their efforts and define what they themselves have to do to really become more sustainable, to also make the trade system in itself a more sustainable system. So I would like to leave it here to stay within the time. Thank you.
Thanks, Sjoerd, for one sticking to the time, but that very holistic overview. To me, the coffee barometer is a very critical piece to the coffee industry to keep everyone on their toes and be kind of that watchdog for the industry, which is a very important role to play. And this is why as CI, we've been supporting that work for several editions now. So very much kind of carrot and stick. So in another organization we work with a lot and support on many fronts is the Global Coffee Platform. So nice segue into some of the points that Sjoerd brought up around like what are companies doing around sustainable sourcing. The GCP has been leading a lot of the efforts around defining what that means. How is that term really evolving over time? So I don't want to steal more of your talking point, Helga, but I'm excited to turn to you to share what you guys found from the latest snapshot report and the sourcing monitoring that you're doing. So over to you.
Thank you, Niels, and thank you for the invitation to present the work of GCP here. So if we can go to the first slide, please. Yeah, for those of you who are not familiar with GCP, GCP is a multi-stakeholder organization that focuses on sustainability and includes different actors in the supply chain, from producers to roasters and retailers, and of course, civil society. And we have a goal of transformational change for more than 1 million farmers that we measure connected to reducing living income gaps through sustainable coffee production. And we have two tiers, a strategy with two tiers to achieve this. One is, if you like, the supply, and one is the demand of coffee that has been produced sustainably. So we, at the country level, we are implementing what we call country plans for farmer prosperity that address then the challenges that producers have to become more sustainable. And then on the demand side, we have these three interconnected tools that are connected to the snapshot. So I'm going to dive into the right-hand side of the tools that are towards sustainable sourcing, because we acknowledge this is not, we need to do more. So we are in that direction. So if we go to the next slide, then we see these three tools. Basically, the coffee sustainability reference code and the equivalence mechanism that are actually connected to the GCP collective report. So the coffee SR code is basically a common definition with the sector about what are the baseline practices of sustainability. And the equivalence mechanism is not only about the what, these practices, but also about the how. So it defines what are the minimum requirements that a scheme would need to put in place to be able to be considered credible and robust, and the schemes that are considered equivalent to the code because they follow this, the what and the how, are eligible for the roasters and retailers to report, to include in the collective reporting. So just to give you an overview, if we go to the next slide, we can see which are these schemes that are eligible for the reporting. We differentiate between third-party assurance and second-party assurance. Third-party assurance is what is often known as certification, and second-party assurance is what is often referred to as verification. So you will see that we have here private schemes, but also the schemes that are quite well established for many years in the sector. So now let's go to the snapshot. And I'm going to give you some of the key highlights, starting in the next slide. And you will see that I'm going to put in the chat then the links for the report so you can dive. But basically here, I just want to share some of the key messages that we have found from analyzing the coffee purchases of 2022. So basically, this is a voluntary report. And for this edition, we had 8 companies, which you see on the left. Basically, these companies have a total of purchases of 2.1 million metric tons and sustainable around 73%. This represents around 23% of the world exports, according to the ICO figures, and it's an increase from the previous report. This report started in 2019, and we have done this annually. So it is not we cannot compare one-to-one because there have been changes to the number of companies that are reporting, but also the schemes that are eligible, but it still shows a trend that is increasing. And to connect to the points that Sjoerd made, basically this is one indicator. So sustainability clearly goes beyond what is being done not only at the farm level, but also in terms of what is being bought. But it's one indicator where we are offering to the sector a methodology in which all the schemes are assessed in the same way, and we can year by year then monitor progress of the companies. So if we go to the next slide, you see a bit of the evolution that I mentioned earlier. So we see that the trend is positive, it's increasing. We started, in figures of 2018 until last year. And also in the last year, we had a bit of a decline in terms of the amount of coffee that was purchased. Then the trend overall is positive. In the last year, we have seen that there was quite an increase of this coffee that has been produced also. Both segments are growing, third party and second party assurance schemes, but the second party has been growing more. I think it's a reflection of also the sector and the private actors developing their own sustainability programs. And then on the bottom of the slide, you can see also who have been the companies that have been reported, and then the number of schemes that are part of this report. So you will see that from 2018 to 2019 is where we have introduced this difference between third party and second party scheme, and that has grown over time. Also, perhaps also to mention that at the end of the month, we're going to be announcing the last round of the scheme this year. So you will see also changes in the next report, as there has been quite some interest in schemes being assessed and against the COFI-SR code and the equivalence mechanism. If we go to the next slide, please, thank you. So here we see a bit of more details on this growth. So if you see all the purchases of the last 5 years, you will see that all the schemes have increased, third party and second party, but also the second party has been growing more. So you see that from 2019, we had also overall 35% of the purchases being that can be considered equivalent, sustainable, as we define it, which is based following these baseline practices of sustainability. And then we're now at 73% from the total purchases. Yes. So if we go to the next slide, here you have another insight. This is a bit different, and again, connected to the point that was made previously about the diversity of origins. I think it's also important that companies also report on this, because we clearly want to also promote that we are sourcing coffee from a diversity of origins, so we can continue promoting the coffee that is produced in very different parts of the world. For this report, only 5 companies reported on these indicators, basically per regions, and we wanted to put Brazil and Vietnam in one, so because they are the biggest regions, and to show more the differences between all the other regions. And we have seen, then this is basically these are the figures for 2022 of these 5 buyers, and you will see that Brazil and Vietnam continue to be high, and as Sort mentioned, Africa in particular is not very high. That can be seen also in the next slide with more details, which basically compares the volumes for 2021 to 2022. What is positive in the 2022, I guess also because, as I mentioned, the reports are done voluntarily, and we have had changes in the companies that report. But for the first time in 2022, we have had, for example, Uganda as an African country that has been included in the report as part of the top 10 countries. And there have been some changes after the top 2. But again, I think this is important to have one methodology to compare then roasters and retailers, so we can really promote and also hold accountable the companies about their sourcing practices and where they're sourcing, if we want to promote also a more diverse of countries than being part of the coffee sector over in the long term. But here, for example, you see that there was a bit of a change between Brazil and Vietnam, but around the same, then that changes a bit in terms of who are the next big countries in terms of those companies that have reported in the collective reporting of GCP. So these are basically the highlights, and I'd be happy to share more information we definitely want more companies to report. The wider the set, the better. We can have a look at not only how this, how the amount of coffee that we consider following these baseline practices of sustainability continues to increase, but also we can see then from which origins then this is taking place, and I think that's quite healthy for the sector. So an invitation to all of you to share this information, and to, if you have contacts with the buyers, roasters, and retailers, to encourage them to participate in the reporting next year. Thank you.
There you go. Great. Thank you, Helga. Super insightful. Always learn new things when I hear presentations on this report. So very, very insightful. And we know the struggle of getting to more companies to report. So I think that's something we share between us for sure. So segueing into our last speaker, Valerie Beard from the Sustainable Coffee Challenge team, who will present on the Commitments Hub on the Sustainable Coffee Challenge. So over to you, Valerie.
Thanks, Niels. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all. And I'll be talking about the Commitments Hub report, just in case you're not aware of the Sustainable Coffee Challenge. It's a movement of more than 160 stakeholders across the coffee sector working to make coffee the world's first sustainable agricultural product. And annually, we come out with this Commitments Hub report. So our Commitments Hub is the platform that houses all of the coffee sector's sustainability commitments. It was launched in 2016 in the spirit of accountability and transparency in order to enable the sector to track progress and recognize openings for collaboration on strategic issues. So we opened reporting in 2017 and then published our first report in 2019. This year, we came out with our 5th report, and it looks at 170 commitments made by 100 coffee stakeholders. I need to figure out my screen. Yes, so there are 2 major findings, I would say, that came out of this Hub report. One is that reporting increased this year. So we saw that 45% more commitments are tracking progress. And then secondly, we saw that stakeholders are really upholding the value that nature is an asset. So we saw an uptick in new commitments with a focus on biodiversity, and also that 95 million coffee trees were planted this year and 11 million non-coffee trees were planted. So those were the 2 major takeaways, but I would say that even with increased reporting, partners are continuing to report more on outputs than impacts. So we really need a lot more work to be done. We're seeing significant gaps remaining to get us to the Sustainable Coffee Challenge's 2025 targets for people, planet, coffee, and markets. And so we need bigger and bolder commitments and more action on the ground to get to that collaboration and increased transparency. The Hub report showed us, as I just said, an increased focus on nature. And you all got the poll question correct. More than half, or almost half, of commitments target SDG 12, responsible consumption and production. And so you're seeing on the left side of the screen that 58% of commitments target conserve nature. And that topic, that theme, grew 13% year over year. And these percentages don't equal 100 because stakeholders can multi-select the focal areas. Most commitments this year were made by roasters. And just to say, since we first published the report, we've seen 7 times growth in commitments, public commitments to coffee sustainability. The most absolute growth was seen in the trader, exporter, or importer category, which moved from just 5 commitments to 36. Most commitments are targeting 2025. You can see that on the bottom of the screen in the middle with the coffee cup with 65 commitments for that year. And commitments support efforts in 45 countries. The #1 country in terms of commitments is Honduras with 46. And we also saw 36 in Colombia and 27 in Uganda. We're noting here that $1.3 billion was invested across 42 commitments, and that's for the lifespan of those commitments. And 74% of these commitments were newly stated this year. And then within that 1.3 billion, 300 million funnels towards 26 different coffee origins. And Africa was the continent where the highest amount of funding was targeted. And you can see the rest of the continents on the lower portion of the right side of the screen. And of course, always more information within the document. As I said in the beginning, as the top line message, reporting doubled year over year in terms of stakeholders, a 52% increase in reporting, and commitments, a 45% increase. So, why? Why did reporting increase so much this year? I think the reporting landscape writ large has been changing. Sherd referenced that with the mandatory requirements for reporting in his section. But we also have this kind of, introductory graphic here. What pressures or opportunities inspire stakeholders to report? Is it regulatory requirements, consumer interests, peer benchmarking, or is it the ability to reach new stakeholders, differentiation via storytelling, or something like that? So just some thoughts on the screen. When stakeholders are reporting, most are self-reporting and provide no external verification. As I just said, reporting is shifting from voluntary to mandatory. So here we're seeing 38% of stakeholders provide no external verification, 34% provide other methods of verification, but those generally include like project-specific reporting systems, for example. And then the rest of the breakdown is on the screen. The challenge is unique in looking at types of assurance methods and reporting, and also at funds allocated per country, which I showed a few slides ago. So we all know that various coffee data, supply chain data, publicly available coffee industry data sources, reporting frameworks, all of those things inform, influence, and then filter into corporate level sustainability reports and coffee sector reports, of which we're hearing from today. So we have a few examples of those coffee sector reports in the bottom half of the Chemex coffee maker on the screen. As we heard from the Coffee Barometer, we see them providing a view into conventional volumes and VSS procurement, as well as a new approach to coffee sustainability strategies of the leading roasters that they came out with this year. Some reports go into much more depth on specific topics, as we heard from GCP in their snapshot report. We're also talking about the specialty coffee transaction guide here. And obviously, this is just some of the major reports that we're aware of, including our hub report, but it's not exhaustive. There are many other reports that the sector looks to in terms of the progress that we're making towards sustainability. And then lastly, my final slide is just an example of one of the dashboards that we showcase in the annual hub report. So as you know, we have 2025 targets for people, planet, coffee, and markets. This is our example for people. Our 2025 target is on the screen, and you can see the progress towards establishing living income and living wage benchmarks in 80% of ICO member producing countries. On the right side, that little thermometer-ish thing of the screen, and it looks like we will be on track to reach that on time, which is wonderful. But time is not on our side. And I think if you look across all of these dashboards and the progress that has been made, we still have work to do. We're getting much closer to 2025, and some of these metrics and dashboards we're not there yet. We need more, as I said in the beginning, we need bigger and bolder commitments. We need more collaboration on the ground. We need to keep the hope. We need to increase reporting and really celebrate the fact that we had more reporting this year, but, you know, continue to do that good work in the years to come. Thanks, Niels.
Thanks so much, Valerie, and thanks for ending on such a high note and a call to action for the industry. Very, very timely and correct. So we have a couple of minutes left for Q&A, and then I have a couple of discussion questions for the speakers as well. But we'll start with the questions that came through the Q&A. First of Elizabeth. Elizabeth, do you want to speak to your question, or otherwise I'll read it out loud. Take that as a read it out loud. Perhaps it might need a little bit of context though, but Elizabeth's question is, can countries use coffee and cocoa plantations as a solution to deforestation and land restoration? A very loaded question. I'm not sure if any of the speakers is willing to speak to this, or should Helga, Valerie? No, should go ahead.
I'm not the specialist in this subject, but of course, what we do see is a need for a lot of renovation and rehabilitation in a lot of coffee and cocoa producing areas. And what we also see is that in a lot of countries, instead of doing that, new land is being cleared to create new coffee areas. And I think the way to go is indeed to renovate and rehabilitate the current areas, and also try to make them more, or adapt them to climate change and make them climate proof. And hopefully that will support us or help us to avoid deforestation from coffee growing. But if it's probably part of a bigger solution, let's put it that way.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think also the question becomes a bit loaded in the context of the EU legislation on deforestation, right? So then it gets to the letter of, if deforestation happened and then you decide to plant coffee on that is problematic. But certainly coffee can absolutely be a solution in terms of agroforestry systems, and so is cocoa. All right, time is our enemy here. So running to the question from Bruno, and if you allow me, Bruno, I'll just read it and then have probably Helga come in first on this. So question being, what explains the stagnation on the use of sustainability standards while there is an increase in the uptake of second-party schemes? Is it a credibility issue, cost related to certification? Is this a move from sustainability as a niche towards standard practices, or other reasons? So Helga, can I invite you to take a first shot at this one?
Thank you. And I think it's a bit of a reflection of what has happened in the sustainability landscape in the past, say, 10 to 15 years. So it's a bit of all of the above. You have seen that the certification started really like as a niche, but you have schemes that sell 30% in a market, which is not at all niche. But also the uptake by the private sector also to develop their own programs, owning sustainability as well, and they are quite closely connected to the farmers. So I think also that these different programs have different audiences, if you want. So one is more towards the consumer to communicate about sustainability. Others are more to communicate to their buyers what they're doing about sustainability. So a bit of all of the above, and I think we're going to be seeing that the certifications are going to continue to evolve. I think the EUDR is a good example where certifications are coming to the forefront of saying we're offering solutions about EUDR, as well as some private schemes as well. But you also see, what I found also very interesting is the private sector from the local buyers, like local exporters and co-ops, developing their own schemes. And I think this could be quite an important step to actually bring sustainability to the last farmers. Somehow certification has also concentrated on quite a particular profile of farmers that have good access to market, high quality markets. And I think this presents an opportunity to expand sustainable practices beyond the usual farmers that actually have access to this kind of models.
Thank you, Helga. And kind of that's a nice segue into a question around fair trade. Could we expect a shift from fair trade to other certification after their announce of price minimum increase, or the clients are willing to support this increase? Thanks. I'm sure you have thoughts on this one, so can I invite you to speak to that?
Yes, I don't know if I have an answer, because it's of course a little bit going on thin ice. Of course, what we do see in the coffee sector, and maybe also to the earlier question, is this drive within the sector to always try to go for the lowest price possible at a certain quality level. So I guess this drive will be there in the sector, and the sector itself is looking for other systems, other ways to create efficiency around sustainability. On the other hand, you can also say, well, fair trade in itself stands for a model and for a premium price coffee. So in that way, it's also not probably competing directly with these other models. But of course, yeah, in the end, it as you can hear, I don't have an answer because I cannot look into the future. But there is indeed a danger. And that's already what is playing out within the fair trade system itself, between the fair trade on the one hand and fair trade USA choosing for a different approach, that this is going to create issues in the near future.
Yeah. Thanks, Sjoerd. Elka or Valerie, feel free to jump in as well. See more and more questions coming through. Let's see. I'll just take the one in order. What is the role of agroecology in all of this? Is there a legal framework somewhere in these countries or contexts? I'll open this up to any of the speakers to respond to.
Yeah, maybe in line with what I was saying around agroforestry and regenerative agriculture, of course, we can agroecology to that list too. There's this urgent need in the sector to really move towards far more intelligent systems. But of course, the example, and just recently I was in Uganda, and then farmers are telling me, well, I would really love to produce my Robustas like in Brazil or Vietnam. So the example is completely wrong, probably, and we need to shift that whole discourse into the direction of a more agroecological system, but that is quite challenging in the sector.
Yeah. I think that's a very valid point, and I also think in terms of beyond just kind of legislative trends, I think there is a push towards more kind of agroecology, agroforestry systems through some of the guidance that is coming out of the science-based targets for the science-based targets initiatives for the climate target, but then also science-based targets for nature, so more in the kind of the biodiversity, land, water. So I think there is a kind of a trend, regardless of legislation, where legislation might kind of provide that floor, and hopefully some of those voluntary initiatives use that as a jumping off point. At least that's what I'm hoping. All right, bunch of additional questions. I'm going to come to the question on land tenure, but first, I see Scott has a question around that I wanted to get to and get Valerie's input on. So it seems from the presentation that there's more sustainable coffee production, more corporate commitments and investments, and more sustainability standards and models. But what is missing is more proof that any of this is having a desired impact on people and the environment. If this is true, would it not make sense in the multi-stakeholder initiatives to focus on impact commitments and on investing in impact monitoring? I think that's a very, very valid question, and something I know has been on the agenda or has been on the agenda of the Sustainable Coffee Challenge. So curious, Valerie, if you can speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, thanks, Niels. Absolutely, Scott. Completely agree with this. I think that, as Neil said, that's the goal of the Sustainable Coffee Challenge, and really looking at commitments and advising organizations on how to better get to that implementation and monitoring and measurement and metrics on the ground. And so we're continuing to encourage that multi-stakeholder collective action and dialogue in that way.
Great, thanks, Valerie. True, and I also think, how do we go from kind of individual commitments and individual interventions, actions, and moving more towards from output indicators to more impact, but then doing that at the sector level as well. And I think there are several efforts also under the Global Coffee Platform, that ICO task force, and we see an increased kind of momentum of the industry rallying around a common set of targets and then also common metrics on how do we track that. I'll squeeze in one last question if we can. Can we, Alexandra, if you allow me? I wanted to pass it to Helga to share a little bit from the GCP code on land tenure and how that is incorporated, and that speaks to the question around land tenure in the chat.
Yes, and I just put the link to the code. So basically, I think there are two levels where the code gives guidance on this. One is about having the legal rights. So, and the legal rights to work that land, and could look very differently in very different contexts. So it could be a leasing, could be you working on the land of your father, you owning the land, or having traditional rights to that land. But then on the other side, having land acquisition, free, prior, and informed consent around land acquisition. So time is short, so I just would like to invite you to have a look at these two pieces of guidance that the code can offer on land tenure.
Thanks, Helga. Great. Well, I didn't have to use any of the discussion questions that I had prepared, so that is a good sign. So thanks everyone for dropping in and being so active in the chat. I think we missed one or few, but we're really out of time, so we'll follow up to make sure that you have your answers addressed. Well, over to you, Alexandra, to wrap it up.
Thank you, Niels, for facilitating this session, and thank you to all our experts, Valerie, Helga, and Sert, for all the insights. So we will share with everyone the materials from this session, the recording, PowerPoint presentation, and the links to the reports that we strongly encourage you to review. And we also would kindly ask you to take up to 3 minutes to complete a quick survey. This will help us improve our events in the future, but also get a sense what you are learning from the events that we are organizing. And also an invitation to those of you who are not members of the FACS community, please join us. You can apply to join the digital platform that we have. You have the links in the chat box. And finally, I would like also to thank Veronica for supporting us with interpretation today, and Philippe with all the tech. And most importantly, thank you to all of you for your time, and we wish you a good rest of your day. Thank you.